According to Jerry, by Richard Krevlin and Rabbi Erwin Kula. And this week, we decided here at Why I Love Jewish that we wanted to do a reading of a play in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And I also want to acknowledge that this particular talkback, I would like to dedicate it to the memory of Rabbi Israel Dresner, who was one of the original freedom riders who marched with Dr. King. Oh, somebody needs to mute. And he passed away today at the age of 92. So in memory of Rabbi Israel Dresner and Martin Luther King Jr., we bring you this talkback. Those of you who just saw the show know that this particular play deals with some very serious issues in a very human way. And I want to invite the authors to join me. Let me tell you a little bit about them first. Richard Krevlin is an award-winning screenwriter, author, playwright, and professor. A graduate of Yale University, Richard went on to earn a master's degree in screenwriting at UCLA's School of Cinema and Television, and he has a master's degree in playwriting and fiction from USC. Over 20,000 screenwriters have been taught by Richard in Los Angeles and around the world, and under his guidance, his students have gone on to sell film scripts and TV shows to Universal, Fox, Paramount, DreamWorks, SKG, and numerous other big studios and production companies. Rabbi Erwin Kula is a disruptive spiritual innovator and a rogue thinker, a seventh-generation rabbi, which I find amazing. He is co-president of KLAL, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership, which is committed to making Jewish a public good. Another reason why I love Jewish. Named one of the leaders shaping the American spiritual landscape, he received the 2008 Walter Cronkite Faith and Freedom Award for his work towards equality, liberty, and a truly interreligious community. And he's been listed in Newsweek for many years as one of America's most influential rabbis. Later on in this discussion, we will invite Leila Elam, the incredible actress who joined me to bring you the piece. And we also have a very special guest panelist, Dr. Chester, who I will introduce a little later with Leila. So I'd like to invite Richard and Rabbi Kula to please join me. Please turn on your videos and unmute yourselves. There's Rabbi Kula and Richard. There you are. Wonderful. So you know, I have always loved this piece. I read this piece many years ago, and I always wanted to do it. I almost had the chance at the New Theater down in Miami several years ago. Unfortunately, I wasn't available at the time due to other commitments, but at least we just got the opportunity to do this wonderful reading, and I hope someday to do a production. Can you guys tell me one at a time or together, number one, when did you write it, and what in the world inspired you to write this piece?
You go first, Rich.
Okay. Well, you know, we'll see how good my memory is, because this was a long time ago. And I was telling somebody today that, you know, I think it has to be 20 years ago we started writing this. And we wanted to do a play about anti-Semitism and racism in America. And you know, it's just sad that it's as topical or more topical today than it was then. It was a moment. Yeah. And so I think it was my idea. I had heard Erwin talk in Los Angeles. I was kind of blown away by what he said. And I think we went for a walk along LAX by the airport right before he was flying out. And we kind of said we liked each other and, you know, we should work on something. Let's figure out what that is. And then I said, you know, I've always been fascinated with this idea of a love story between a rabbi and a gospel singer. What do you think? And he goes, sounds good. I never written a play before, but if you want to give it a shot. And my dad, who's no longer here, was a practicing attorney in New Haven, Connecticut. So when I was visiting my dad a few months later, probably, I contacted Irwin. So I was in Los Angeles. He was in New York. I said, I'm going to be in New Haven. Irwin said, I'll take a train in. And he took a train to New Haven. We sat in my dad's law office and we started to play together. I mean, there's no other really way to say it. And I said, if you were doing a sermon on the Holocaust, what would you say? And I was taking notes, and he said, well, I did this sermon, and he showed me this. And then I said, well, what, you've done panels with the African-American community. What is your take on this? And he said, well, I've got this speech I did. And, and we just worked together. I mean, Irwin, I don't know if you want to clarify or, but it was just fun. Irwin was a pleasure because he said, you're the playwright. What do you think? And I go, well, but the main character's a rabbi. What does a rabbi think? And so we had fun. There wasn't, it was an egoless process, and that's what made it fun. Nobody was trying. I had no pretensions of knowing what it would feel like to be a Black gospel singer. But that's what writers do. I always call it what I call the Tequila Mockingbird syndrome. When Atticus says, put yourself in the shoes of another human being. And that's what writers get to do. Act what actors get to do. And we live in a world where it's a little scary because now we're told you can only write. I've been told I'm not allowed to write anything but middle-aged white Jewish male stories. And I get that. But I think the key to this play and the key to what Irwin has taught me is it's about conversation. It's about dialogue. It's about learning from others and listening to others. And that's what this play really is about. And I think that's the theme that we're trying to convey, that, you might not be Jewish, you might not be a rabbi, you might not be Black, you might not be, but you can try to understand others and relate to them and talk to them and be honest with them and listen to them. And Irwin, I mean, you spend your life really doing this, so maybe you want to, I'll hand it off to you now.
Well, I was going to ask Irwin, if you don't mind telling us not just your thoughts on the creation of the piece, but also the kind of research that must have gone into being able to write this kind of a piece.
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, the one piece that I just want to add to the origin story was our meeting was completely spontaneous and by luck. In other words, we met each other standing somewhere. It was completely by luck. So that is that's important, and that we were both curious about each other. And I think, though we're both white males, about similar ages, Jewish, what's also true is we were curious about each other's experience, and that is at the heart, the curiosity. I think that in terms of research, the truth is, I have been involved in Jewish life, since I'm 4 years old. I have grown up in the soup of Jewish life. I've been a rabbi in a synagogue. I have been on the NAACP board when, in the mid 80s, from 82 to 88. I used my own experience. In fact, one of the things that I didn't do was sort of aggressive research. I wanted to be more visceral in it, because as it is, I tend to over intellectualize, so, and I think that is one of amongst the many, many sort of running threads or themes, is the disconnection that we have with our own experience for a whole variety of reasons, whether it's over intellectualizing, whether it's shame, whether it's fear of the other, whether it's inherited trauma. There's so many things that disconnect us from sort of the realness of reality. And one of the things that Rich was so good at, I mean, we sat in his father's office for 7-8 hours. And what's so good is that Rich is very, 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 very down to earth, natural, and he doesn't over intellectualize it. And when he would use it when necessary, but then ask to be more real. And so, so I actually did not do research, but I've been embedded in Jewish life and these issues for my whole life.
Right. And let me just say, as an actor, to be able to speak those words, it's a testament to the great work that you both did, that it was so easy. The words just came pouring out. And there was no real acting involved because it was so honest and so real, certainly for my character. And I'm curious to know from Leela how she felt as well. Before I bring on Leela and Dr. Chester, I do have one other question. You guys decided to tackle a very sensitive subject. This whole, as you were saying earlier, the idea that it's complicated. The relationship between the Black and the Jewish, people is very complicated. And so when you were writing it, while you were working on it, was there a discussion among the two of you and anyone else that you may have talked to about that sensitivity and how best to tackle it and how not to tackle it? What can be said or what should not be said? Because I find in my discussions sometimes that comes up. Like Richard was saying, now apparently you're not allowed to write anything unless it's about an older, middle-aged, bald Jewish guy. So, how did you guys tackle that?
I mean, I'll answer for myself. I took influences very seriously. So somebody like James, I studied with James Cone, a Black liberation theologian in the 70s at Union Theological Seminary. And there weren't a lot of Jews in that room at the time. Let me put it that way, yet alone rabbinical school students. I was a student at the time. Cornel West was a very, very, very important influence. And so I had the good fortune to learn with or read very seriously the best critiques of what I would call both white America and Jews. We tend to always compare our best to someone else's worst. And that's why we always win in those sorts of debates. But I had the opportunity to read the very best and to study with some of the people who are offering the most genuine, authentic, serious, thoughtful critiques that destabilized me. And I brought that to the table. And I think having a sort of seventh generation pedigree, I'm less fearful. I mean, now I'm more fearful than back then, actually. I'm less fearful of being canceled. Now, we weren't being canceled back then. That's now. But it's very hard for someone to say to me, you're a self-hating Jew. You're all the sorts of things that communities do to marginalize people in their own community stepping across boundaries. So that's sort of where I was coming from. And Rich and I met at an interesting moment in my life because I was in turmoil myself about moving out of a sort of tribal understanding of Jewish and moving to a post-survivalist. There's a line in the play, something about you can't obsess about survival and survive, something like that. I forget exactly what the line. If you worry so much about survival, you won't be able to survive. That was exactly what I was going through at the moment, making the break with sort of what I completely understand, come from, but have left, which is a sort of trauma-induced Jewish identity.
Richard? your thoughts on how you tackled the sensitivity of the subject matter?
It's funny because when you, it's scary, but there's the line in the play which Irwin supplied, and I don't know where Irwin heard it. Religion should comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I guess it's not your line, it's not my line.
Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Okay, it's Heschel's line. But I've also now heard people use that about art. And as a work of art, as an artist, we're not claiming to represent anybody except us, and these are two human beings that are flawed, and they're two human beings that we hope feel kind of real. I had a profound moment watching the play a week ago because guess who was sitting next to me? A guy named Aaron. And Aaron started weeping at moments because the line about kindness starts at the bottom is truly the last thing his mother and Irwin's mother ever said. And it's a very personal play, and so we're, and maybe that's always an artist's out, but as an artist, we're just telling a personal story of two human beings that we hope resonates with others, and trying to afflict the comfortable, get you to think a little bit, and hopefully laugh a little bit, and what's happening right now, stimulate a little bit of conversation, and there, it's so interesting what Irwin said to me about that fear of being canceled. When we wrote this, that didn't exist. Now it's profoundly affecting I think when we wrote this, there's a little bit of political correctness starting to happen, but that was really it. And Irwin doesn't have a congregation per se, which gives him a little freedom. And you see what happens in the play with someone who does have a congregation and tries to push the envelope and gets punished for it. So there is a canceling going on in the play that I never thought of that way until this moment. We both just liked each other, had fun, and took a chance, and it's just fabulous for me to see the play is still alive and still speaking to people, and I hadn't heard it in years, and I was like, wow, this is one of the best things I've ever written. I love this play, and it's exciting. I hope, you guys do a full production. I hope this play, this reading kind of sparks something, because I think it's an important play.
Well, and
I think the other thing is I mean, I don't know, because I'm not a playwright. He's the playwright. I'm sort of like I'm the lucky person who got to meet Rich and be his friend, and he took me in and we did it together. So I might not be saying this is right, but I think we fell in love with these two characters too, and therefore could tolerate, which I don't think in America we're doing such a good, tolerate the heat. There are times where they're really rough on each other, and maybe they could be rougher even, I don't know, but it felt rough when we were writing it. Yeah. But they could somehow slowly be able to be the container and hold each other's rough feelings, and we've become not so good at that, and so.
Well, speaking of great art and great artists, I want to introduce our other two panelists, and one of them who performed the role of Nia. When I read this piece the first time, which was many years ago, the first person I wanted to do it with, the only person I wanted to do it with was Leila Elam. She's a graduate of the New World School of the Arts in Miami. She's won 2 Carbonell Awards as Best Actress, and she's made guest star appearances on the television shows Graceland, Bloodline, and David Makes Man. She spent 2 seasons as Diana from Toledo on the hit TBS show Wrecked. And we also have a very special guest panelist. Dr. T. Chester is a performance studies scholar specializing in gender, sexuality, and religion in the Black diaspora. Their research uses both popular culture and the lived experiences of Black people to explore the development and performance of sexuality and gender identities. And over the last 10 years, Dr. Chester has taught in Black studies, women and gender studies, and theater departments at the university level. So I'd like to invite Leila and Dr. Chester to join us, please. Please turn on your videos and unmute yourselves. There's Dr. Chester, and here's sweet Leila. Very quickly, let me just get to Leila before we get to Dr. Chester's expertise. Leila, you and I have known each other for many years. And like I said, the first person, the only person I wanted to read this with was you, always. Now, what I found out after having met you is that you actually spent some time around Jewish people. And do you want to tell us a little bit about your experiences in Israel and how you felt about portraying this particular character?
I have, for most of my life, been around Jewish people. I guess it's just how it was. I just grew up in a neighborhood where there were a lot of Jewish people. I went to school where there were a lot of Jewish people, and just kind of like the way my life has gone, I ended up in Israel somehow for 2 years. And so I just have been around Jewish people a lot. And so I don't think that me personally would have the same feelings of fear of maybe someone trying to convert her. I mean, I wouldn't have that fear personally myself, but it was interesting to be able to, use a little bit of, learning Hebrew, when you learn a skill and then you're able to, use it in your work, that's always nice. So, having a little bit of that already coming into that was, a nice thing to be able to do. But I always like to do work that doesn't necessarily make people feel comfortable, but it makes them think about things that are very important. And I think as a person, that's the kind of work I want to do. And so playing Nia gave me a chance to play a character who will make people ask questions and make me as an actor think even more about how I feel about my personal situations and when I'm dealing with how I'm building that character.
We're very honored to have Dr. Chester with us. And Dr. Chester, I would love to hear your thoughts. You had the opportunity to read the script first. You do work in theater departments. I'm very curious to hear your feedback on the issues that this play tries to tackle, and how you felt we succeeded. And how can we generate these conversations? And before we go on, and now we're going to open up the panel. Anybody out there that's watching, I know we have several people watching. You can ask us questions, put them in either the chat or the Q&A. There's actually a great question already in the Q&A from Jennifer, who says, what is the best method of addressing issues such as anti-Semitism and the Black experience? Through multi-faith events such as this one, debates? How do you open the conversation without seeming accusatory? And so, Dr. Chester, what do you think?
I think a lot of things. Thank you for having me here today. I know, it's often said, right, the most segregated hour is Sunday mornings, right? And so often I think religion, really, even besides religion, by race, by class, all of these different ways in our religious and spiritual practices, we are segregated. And so I definitely enjoyed seeing these two people being brought together for not necessarily a religious reason, but really coming together and learning more about each other's faith within this piece. Yeah, I don't know if I could tell you all my thoughts, but I'll save some of them. I definitely appreciate having some of the history of Black Americans and Jewish Americans experiences in this country. The playwright talks about, the civil rights movement and the Jewish, the two Jewish men who were killed in Philadelphia, Mississippi, right? As well as, when I think back even further, when I think back to like the Scottsboro Boys, right? And Jewish lawyers and all these different histories of ways in which Jewish people really have shown up and worked alongside a lot of Black people. Particularly, I think the Jewish faith itself there's a lot of social justice that's like built into Judaism that lends itself into these particular movements and fighting for the rights of the oppressed that I definitely appreciate and I saw within this piece. I do have some questions for the playwrights, and so again, thinking back to like, my just some understanding, right? So Alice Walker, right? Alice Walker's first husband, she met during the civil rights movement, they got married, and there's so many love stories that happened during the civil rights movement between Jewish people and Black people. But a lot of those relationships didn't last. And so I think one of the things I thought that was really powerful about this play is that you can show the individual connections, but when these people have to go back and face their own communities and their society, in their population, how the reality sets in some of those issues, particularly for Nia, right? Jerry thought it was going to be great to have her come and sing in all those different ways, but how his congregation reacted, and that lets us know some of those larger issues that even these on an interpersonal level, we can't deal with the systemic issues on an interpersonal level. It's larger than the fact that these two people can find a connection. So that's all.
I think that is such a critical look. First of all, we're writing this a while back, so I think that even these understandings of systemic, not if you were in the academic community probably 20 years ago, but if you were just sort of outside, just beginning to understand, wow, this is not a person. It's not personal in that way, and we're not going to address things. These are serious social, systemic issues that are social, political, economic, cultural, etc. And what is interesting, I think that we intuited back then when we wrote this, was that these two people were going to have to break, right, from their embedded communities, and that is a very difficult thing to do. And whatever is going to happen is going to be emergent. It's not going to be linear. It's not going to be because we debate and we get it together, and it's not going to be we talk it through and it works out. And it's not even going to be because we legislate something and everything works out. We're going backwards in certain ways on legislation that was incredible. It was revolutionary, and it's amazing how revolutions can be returned. So, but there is no choice at the individual level for individuals to make certain breaks. And that's very painful, those breaks. For me, the mourner's Kaddish, right, is not simply mourning the mother. Yes, of course, it's the mourning the mother. It's honoring and mourning a part of the past that Jerry is going to walk away from. And it's very hard to do that because he also has a lot of trauma, personal trauma, the collective trauma. But there is no way. He has to be able to make the break. And of course, we don't know what happened 5 years later to these two characters who do a lot of healing for each other personally. But as they heal each other personally, they're more distant, they're more disconnected from the very social and cultural structures that actually, well, I think Nia's was much healthier than the rabbis for a variety of reasons. But yeah, I think it's a very important point you make. Wow.
And time for a sequel, perhaps.
Yeah.
Richard, what are your thoughts on that? You're muted.
A bunch of things came up. For me, there is no really, I mean, I've never been asked this, and Erwin and I don't know, maybe we talked about this 20 years ago, but it's pretty ambiguous at the end. We know he's leaving the temple. We know Nia has shown up to honor, their relationship, but this isn't a Disney movie, I mean, they're not going off into the sunset together. And I've never been asked, and so I don't even know what the future holds for them. And it's kind of more, I think, different audience members based on their background. It'd be interesting to see Dr. Chester's take on, what you thought would happen next, kind of thing, because it's open and ambiguous for interpretation. There's a beauty, you don't get it in the reading. I'm not trying to be critical, but due to the nature of a reading, there is a real beauty in the ending where the male actor's on stage and the female actor walks through the audience and they don't even see her because it's in the dark until she starts singing. And it's really just it's my favorite theatrical moment in the play. I start weeping. Their voices, and it says in the script, their voices joined together. And in this ancient song with an ancient melody that then they alter, and that's something you can do in theater. You can have a magical moment of union, but then the lights come up, this play is over, and I don't know what happens next, nor should anyone, I don't think Erwin and I wanted it to be crystal clear. It's ambiguous, but it's important that she showed up for him. It's important that they sing it in more than one way, and so there's certain things we wanted. And then beyond that, I don't know. Dr. Chester, what was your take on the ending and where they're going and your response to that? I don't know. I mean, that'd be interesting for me to hear.
I mean, I don't think I necessarily had a take on like where they went out afterwards, but for me, I thought a lot about the costs that people have, right? So I don't necessarily believe in cancel culture. I do believe in holding people accountable, and I do believe that everything we do, there is a cost. And so for Nia to sing at her church, and I really appreciated that part because I definitely remix gospel songs all the time to make it like with my own personal theology and where I am currently. And even as a kid, I was like, a woman, I'm not saying a man all the time, but that's another topic. But she lost her job at the church, right? And then she gets another job and she loses that job and she gets 30-day payment. Jerry has the ability, he gets to leave on his own terms and walk away with his 18 million master degrees, right? And these things that he can fall back on. And so I wonder a lot about like Nia on just a practical cost way. How is she going to continue to survive? She talked before about how it's not maybe that easy getting a job as a choir director and all those other things. So I look a lot about the material realities of Nia more so than like even their joint struggles and like what costs she has to pay to be there for her. Not saying Jerry doesn't pay costs. I mean, he makes the decision to leave his position.
But you bring up
Yeah,
a very
that's good.
interesting point. I think you touched on it earlier, Dr. Chester. If you go back to the 1880s and the 1890s and the turn of the 20th century, and the Jews had arrived from, in the first wave of the 1880s, poor paupers with nothing, 4 cents in their pocket, the struggle for social justice, the labor movement. And at the same time, the African-American community was struggling and didn't even have civil rights. I mean, couldn't vote. And there was a struggle that was shared. What comes to mind is that Paul Robeson, the great social activist and opera singer, used to sing Yiddish songs in his concerts because he was working with a lot of the Jewish social activists of the time in the labor movement and social justice. I think, though, that there is now this conception of white privilege. And I think Nia says in the play at one point, the concept that, yeah, you made it. You guys struggled perhaps, but then you made it. But we didn't. And now we've been left behind and you've gone on to your successes and it's not fair anymore. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But I'm curious to know, and Leela, again, maybe you could start us off on this. How did you feel as an actor, portraying this particular role about that relationship with this Jewish guy who turns out to be a rabbi? You didn't even know he was a rabbi, and now you're, wondering whether he's going to, try to convert you to Judaism. How, to be able to get into a relationship, considering the segregation that Dr. Chester was talking about earlier. We are segregated in many ways. And then I'd like the rest of the panelists to kind of pick up on that.
Well, I find a lot of truth in the relationship because, like I said, in my own personal relationships, I mean, they haven't been like Nia, where she was afraid or maybe not familiar with Judaism. But I think when I'm working, I find myself, even right now, I'm 95% of the time when I'm working in some way expressing my Black experience with either Jewish people or with white people in the 1800s. I mean, I find myself all the time working, playing a character that's not just a person necessarily without everything else. It's always like I'm playing a Black character dealing with a Black issue. And I mean, sometimes, I guess when I was younger, I guess it could be quite tiresome. You just want to play a role without having to always dig through everything, you know what I mean? Or just maybe not have it always be about that. But this was nice because it wasn't that typical Black-white struggle that it always seems to be about. Even right now, I'm doing a show that's all about all of that right now again. So this was different in it was dealing with faith. And I think that Jerry really wanted to understand Nia. I think he really, really was trying. And I don't necessarily feel that I've been in other plays or works of art where the character is having a positive experience with the person of the other race. And I think that Nia is allowed to express herself and really go in there and say what she has to say. And they can really have kind of a fair discussion. And people are allowed to take from it what they will, instead of, I don't know, all the time just feeling like I'm playing this downtrodden person all the time when playing roles where I'm dealing with a white person. And the show is about, it touches on racial issues. So I found that different, and I found it nice.
Dr. Chester, what do you think about, white privilege, Jewish privilege, where we used to be and where we are now?
I'm teaching this class right now called Race, Gender. Sorry.
No, I'm saying, and do that in 1 minute.
I'll do it.
I'm joking. I'm joking.
I'm teaching this class called Race, Gender, and Sport, and it's funny because one of the things they have to watch sit this week is this documentary called House We Live In. And so I, like many people, do not believe race is a biological reality. I think race is, a social construct, something that we give meaning to. And I think whiteness is extremely interesting, particularly whiteness in the United States of America, and how the definition of whiteness has changed and shifted to include people, to exclude people, and particularly thinking about when ethnic European immigrants came in the country who weren't considered white, and how Italians and how Jewish people slowly became white, and or even the fact that Mexicans were considered white at one point, then they became Mexicans. And there's Japanese people suing to be considered white because at one point in this country, you had to be white in order to have citizenship. And I think that's one of the things, you talk about being left behind, or Black people being left behind. And as we see maybe Jewish Americans fitting more and more into this idea of what whiteness is in America, there's maybe more of that disconnect between the oppressed struggles that, people call it trauma bonding, that maybe Black people and Jewish people went through, and also capitalism and money, all of those different things, and access to wealth builds greater and greater divides. But yeah, I just think the ways in which race changes all the time and what it means to be something is so interesting. Right. Less than white privilege, but more of like how we give these things meanings, how we decide who is white in this particular moment and who isn't.
But, Erwin and Richard, I love that you guys were able to bring out in the play, you weren't afraid to have the discussion. Here comes the rabbi, Jerry, talking about how Jews marched with Martin Luther King and were part of the Freedom Riders and died for the cause, but he only mentions the two Jews and doesn't mention the black guy.
Right. And the two Jews, I think that this is, so Professor Chester, and there's so many things you're saying, they're important that I want to try. Part of what's happened, again, this was 15 years ago now. Part of what's happened is, look, Jews are the wealthiest ethnic group in the United States. These are all things that are very uncomfortable for Jews to say. The wealthiest ethnic group in the United States, most college educated in the United States, the most integrated, whatever we mean, religion, ethnic group, right, in the United States, according to the sociologist of religion, like the Robert Putnam, the most respected religion in America. So we have this odd combination and we're seeing it play out generationally, where we are white, okay? And whatever we mean, I don't even know what the word privilege means, but if privilege means wealth, and if privilege means power, and if privilege means that the entire world stops for Colleyville, the entire America stopped yesterday for Colleyville. Thank God for the FBI. Thank God for the Dallas police. Thank God, blah, 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 blah. Thank God. Thank God. But let's be clear, the whole America, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox stopped. By the way, everybody agreed there. These tribes of MSNBC and Fox and CNN, everyone agreed the world should stop and let's watch Colleyville. Now, as a Jew, fantastic, great, amazing, unbelievable, but let's be honest, Colleyvilles happen all the time in this country, okay? And Colleyvilles happen in this country in which the result is not as, thank God, right, and right, worked out, that people got saved, okay? See, now here's even, I don't know if I should say, but let's be clear, right? It is not 100% clear that if that criminal who kidnapped or held hostage, if that person, and I'm afraid to say what I want to say, there's no possibility if that was Kyle Rittenhouse that he would have been shot. Okay, because the people were saved already. Okay, and the people saved themselves to their credit, and I'm happy. All I'm saying is these are the conversations that we have, the counterfactuals, the wider takes that are very uncomfortable to say. Again, I'm proud that we made it. I am proud that the world, that every television station worried. But we have to be aware that, and now we're holding that at the same time, that for millions of Jews yesterday, and I say this, I don't know how to, it was as if it was the 1930s. That's the, what did you call it, Professor? Trauma embodiment? That was I need to learn that term.
I said trauma bonding.
Trauma bonding, yeah. So the trauma was in the body, right? And we are now not trauma bonding in a healthy way. That is what's happening.
Do you
and
think
so now we have to own that. It's like I'm in the Spider-Man game. Whoever has more power has more responsibility. That's Spider-Man. So like, I mean, we have to take that seriously, right? And I'm probably a little aggressive here because I'm taken aback by, it's true. Jerry will have a job and Jerry will have money and Jerry probably inherits from his mother who just died, and Jerry probably has a home, and he definitely has a home, and there is no possibility that Jerry will not be able to pay his rent for the next year. There's no possibility, right? And I didn't even see that in the play until you brought it out, right? But somehow we were able to see that Nia would not be able to pay
the rent
a month
within
later.
a couple of months. Yeah,
it's okay. I don't have any problem seeing it on the Nia, but why didn't I see it on the Jerry side? I did not see it until you said it.
but my question to you guys is: do you think the world would have stopped if the same crazy, sick individual would have gone into a Sikh house of worship?
Not a shot.
Not
a shot. Not a shot. Or a black church.
Or a black church, or
not a shot. By the way, that doesn't mean they wouldn't be covered. I want to be clear. It would be covered. But if you watch this yesterday, and I watched, why? I even asked myself, I mean, this is terrible. Google how many churches are attacked in the United States each year. Okay. Right. Black churches are attacked. Now it's okay. We are tribal. We do belong to our own groups. I'm not beating myself up. I'm saying this is what we have to own about how we as human beings, we're not going to evolve unless we begin to own, right, this kind of stuff,
But,
what
but
it really
we can't-
means to belong, what it
Right.
really means to have more power than other people, and not because we're immoral. It may be inheritances, but at some point, you're responsible for the present. You're not fundamentally responsible for your past, though that's a weird thing to say because Jews are into memory, 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 memory. We want everyone to remember, 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 don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. But other people we want them to forget, but you forget. Now, again, I have a rule. One should be most embarrassed about one's own group. And generally speaking, one should self-critique before one other critiques. That's my general rule in public. So that's what I'm doing here, also modeling that like, let's be clear. We're the remembering people. Remember, but other people should forget and get over it.
But there's a lot of resentment out there. Let's just be honest with each other, right? We're going to have an honest conversation. So and listen, I'm Jewish. My organization is called Why I Love Jewish. Part of our whole mission is to try to fight anti-Semitism, which is on the rise again, which I
So here's the
believed.
thing. Here's the thing. It's not, I mean, this is part of there are different narratives fighting for attention in the Jewish body politic and in the American body politic. One of those is, for a variety of reasons that we can't go into here, is anti-Semitism, right? Fundamentally on the rise. The statistics are very complicated, okay? It is true. Here's what I mean, very simply. The ADL has 3 buckets: assault, vandalism, and harassment. Assault was down, vandalism was down, even by their own statistics, and harassment was up. Harassment was up, and half of the harassment that was up was Zoom bombing. This is 2020 statistics. Now, of course, there was Zoom bombing because no one Zoomed until COVID. So you shouldn't be surprised. Now, that is not anti-Semitism is up. Let's be clear, okay? There's 1.2 million assaults in this country in a year, okay? There were 31 assaults in 2020. Now, one assault is too much. I want to be clear. I'm not justifying, but we have to be more self-critical because the inheritance of the trauma that any assault immediately evokes Auschwitz for us. And that is complete. My father came here in 1938. I get it. Okay. But part of what it means, and it's very hard to heal, really hard to heal. Okay. And it's still fresh. But part of it is to say, to take a deep breath and say, the interesting story about Charlottesville was not crazy marchers. They need to be addressed. We should address it. The really interesting thing was that Christians who ringed the church overnight ringed the synagogue overnight so that the synagogue would not be vandalized. Now, we have never had that in anywhere we lived. We're not talking about that we managed to escape. The Christians ringed the synagogue, stayed up all night to ensure. Now, that's at the very least, that's as much of the story. Part of the story at Colleyville yesterday. I'm not saying it's the whole story, but if you only tell a piece of the story that affirms your trauma and the worst view of the world, you wind up literally inheriting the trauma. And when the trauma is not connected to a genuine external reality, a lot of distortions happen. At least as important yesterday was that the Muslim community that this rabbi had a relationship with came out and was around the synagogue because it was trying to show empathy and solidarity. Now, I watched CNN for 6 hours. Why wasn't that told? They had enough. They had nothing to say. They had nothing to say for 6 hours. Nothing to say for 6 hours. And the same loop because they weren't even allowed to go near and film. So it was the same loop. No journalist was interested enough to find out what else was going on. Instead, as listeners, viewers, not only white people, but white Jews, right? And we have no idea what Jews of color are thinking is a whole other issue, okay? But what white Jews heard all day. What if they had heard just once for 1 minute every hour? It's fascinating. But the mosque, the community that is part of that mosque that this rabbi had a relationship with, right? They had no problem saying how often the rabbi had a relationship with it, because that is affirming. But what would have been 1 minute every hour to say, or to interview somebody from the other community that now is a little bit marginal, because this is a Muslim doing this, so that is a problem. And they have their own issues, whatever they means there. Okay. All I'm saying is there's more to every story, right? And that I think we do try to get at. Nia and Jerry, they do more than most people can, and I think part of it is because there's an erotic energy between them, by the way. And I think that erotic energy, this is the Audre Lorde. The erotic energy is important. When everything is just in the head, it's amazing how we'll kill each other. When there's a little bit of erotic energy there, there's just a touch of possibility.
And neurotic energy as well. Richard, I can see now how Jerry tends to sermonize. I now get it. Now I get it. But I do want to get back, because we're kind of getting towards the hour at this point. And I don't want to go over too much, but there's no limit. We can keep on talking if we like. I do want to get back, because again, you see, we're talking about anti-Semitism. We're talking about Jews. I want to get back to the idea that the Black part of the equation needs to be discussed more. And we need to find the way to build the bridges between the cultures. And I have a friend who's very, very active in the Black community. And he and I have talked about these things. And he's very resentful of the Jewish people. Very. From his perspective, he looks at the Jewish people as, in some ways, having been oppressive of the Black community. And yes, there are bad people everywhere. There are bad Jews, there are bad Muslims, there are bad Black people, there are bad everybody. But coming from New York City and having worked in the real estate business, and knowing that there are landlords out there that are very oppressive in the slums, and some of them are Jews, and there is resentment. Justified, unjustified, that's not the issue. The issue is, how do we speak to this resentment? How do we open up the discussions? And Dr. Chester, I'd love for you to help us, and Richard as well, from your playwriting perspective, because I think you did it as a playwright, which I think was great. It's one-on-one conversation, Nia, Jerry, honest human beings talking to each other is great. But how do we deal with that on a societal level, Dr. Chester?
I definitely believe in conversations. And I think, like Leela, I was born and raised in South Florida. And I think there's just a certain amount of experience with the Jewish community that you have being in South Florida. I remember, like, one of my friends her part-time job was at the JCC, and we used to come over there and play basketball, or it was around, right, in a way that maybe I think in some maybe other aspects of the country or other places in the country, there's not as much. My friend teaches at Brandeis right now, and he was talking about all the days they get off for Jewish holidays. I know that because growing up in South Florida, I remember we always would get off for Jewish holidays. And so this idea of this resentment that the Black community or Black people might have towards Jewish people, I do think, I'm not to say that's not there, and it's definitely there. Obviously, Farrakhan, we hear all kinds of different things that's there. But I also think there's maybe just a disregard. I just don't think Jewish people really think about Black people like that in the same amount, right? Or not to say that Jewish people are resentful, but we all live in this country, right? And this country is founded on anti-Blackness. And so ideas about Black people is shaped by the media and all kinds of things. And so Jewish people are or thinking about Black people, it fits the narrative. And I think what Erwin was saying, the reason why that had so much coverage, because it fits the narrative. Bad Muslim person harming Jewish people. And so when we don't have things that don't fit these narratives of like good Black person or bad, whatever the narrative is, Black people are poor, they're mad, they're angry, and they're resentful to Jewish people. We don't hear these stories of other ways in which the Jewish people and Black people come together. What we keep hearing are these same narratives over and over that becomes true, even when it's not the reality for a lot of people's experiences. And until we have these conversations to really talk and to see our differences and the things we have in common, I think we're always just going to believe what's on the popular culture, what's on the narrative, what the media shows us, one side of the story.
Interesting. Fascinating. Richard, do you have a thought?
Yeah, well, the only thing I'd like to add is simply that we made a conscious choice to have them really go at each other. But if you look at the scene, and of course you can't disregard what Erwin called that erotic energy that exists underneath, which allows it to happen. And at the end, they laugh, and we, another thing, we're talking about gender and stereotypes and all this stuff, and maybe there's a need to talk a little bit about the role of comedy and the role of laughter, that it allows us, it's funny. I look, every time someone sends me anything that's slightly uncomfortable in a text, how do they end the sentence? LOL. Okay, so that's what we do as human beings when we're getting a little closer to the bone. We use humor or have nervous laughter, and it gives us permission to be more honest and to, they're establishing a safe space to say whatever they want, because we care about each other, and they use comedy, and it's about people being allowed to say what they feel without being canceled, and that's something you don't see a lot anymore, and scary. I see all of us, even tonight, being very careful, because this is on YouTube and this is going to be taped, and can we say what we feel, and what are the ramifications of that? And that fear can inhibit the growth that can come from this kind of conversation. So navigating that with art, with talkbacks about art, and having, people like Dr. Chester sharing with Erwin and me and you and, and everybody, the actors and the audience. I don't know if we'll have any time to get the audience questions, but having that interaction and honestly discoursing without fear of horrendous ramifications allows for what we want in this play. So, that's what we were trying to do.
And I think you're right.
I want to say one thing. Dr. Chester said something that I want to lift up, because when things fit in to the narrative, the dominant, I don't even want to use that, when the conventional narrative that we all see on TV, let's use just that one. When things fit into that, right, it's very easy. And it's very easy for rabbis, for ministers, for whatever the different tribes are. It's really easy when it fits in. Part of it is to everybody has to be on their own, right? Individually first, ourselves, be willing to be more vulnerable to hear things that don't fit in. And that's hard. And because part of what, and I don't want to make this more complicated, but part of what capitalism has done is it has a certain understanding of the individual and of autonomy of our own agency that does not allow for or it denies vulnerability, it denies dependency, it denies interdependence. Everyone is on their own, and everyone has to make it. That's in some respects the mother for Jerry, who is Jerry is on his own in a certain way because the love is based on achievement. The love is based on accomplishment, which is actually not the way that is really very, very much a product of capitalism. And so there is no way to get at your question. There's no way to get at your question, Avi, unless we are going to be willing to attack that form of autonomy and understand that the entire drama is relational and that it is fundamental about being vulnerable, being more fragile than we ever imagined, not being self-sufficient, being dependent, being interdependent is absolutely core to what it means to be human. And I would say that the Jewish community has some work to do in that because we have benefited for a variety of reasons, okay? But it has also created immense amount of shame, immense amount of toxic autonomy, amazing forms of distortion, which is what, by the way, I think capitalism has done to people who have less power, and it turned people into more victims than they actually are. One of the things I love about what Leela said at some point, she said earlier, she said, this play, and I don't mean it to be sound, this play somehow she didn't feel in the same exact role, but somehow she could, be a little different in this role, that she could. Now, I'm not saying we did a great job in it. I don't know, but that's what I'm talking about. Powerless people have more power than they imagine, and powerful people have far less than they think they do. And we got to get at some of that more honestly.
And I want to close with the idea that, number one, I love the conversation we've had. And I'm very thankful to all of you for your honesty and for your sharing. Ultimately, I think through the arts, we can indeed touch people. And, interestingly enough, believe it or not, we may already have a producer in New York who contacted us tonight and said, hey, I really love this thing. Why don't you guys call me and let's see if we can make this happen. So, this is the kind of piece that I think can open the door to a conversation, can open the doors to build the bridges, can really start up reuniting. Because again, I feel you were right. Historically, Dr. Chester, you were absolutely right. The Jews and the Black people were together for the longest time in the trenches. When Dr. King was around, there were so many people of all faiths, and Jews were there supporting what he was doing. And I think that over the last several decades, we've grown a little farther and farther apart. We've started to segregate more and more. In the early days on Miami Beach, the sign said, no Blacks and Jews allowed. Okay, so we understand, and I think that's what you guys wrote in this play, which I loved so much, is that, from the Rabbi Jerry's perspective, Jews and Blacks have always been together. Yes, we're holding hands and we're fighting the good fight. And then he learns from Nia that that's not necessarily the truth anymore. And maybe he's been looking at it from a little bit of a distorted perspective, because each of us look at it from our own perspective. Any closing thoughts before we say our goodbyes? Leela, you've been the quietest. What do you think? Unmute yourself.
Well, it's really been a journey because I was involved in this a long time ago, and to see where the play has come since that time has been very interesting, and it just keeps getting better. And I just want to see where this journey goes, because it's been very interesting. And I'm really grateful to you, Avi, for bringing me on board with you and letting me be a part of this experience again.
A dream come true for me. Dr. Chester, what are your final thoughts?
I definitely really enjoyed this conversation and having it with you. I just want to say one thing. My father is a pastor, and there's a line in there where they talk about like the Black pastors, just like they don't prepare their sermons. They just like what's on their heart. I've been telling my dad for years to just open up the Bible and like point your finger and just start talking. But he spends he's always preparing his sermons. So just for him, I was like, I can't speak for anyone else besides him and my brother who are both pastors, but they spend way too much time for me personally preparing their sermons.
Richard, Erwin, what do you guys think?
I'm taking notes here, so we'll have to look at that. I just want to thank you. It's been kind of extraordinary to revisit this. As I said, after we wrote it a long time ago, we saw it seemed like anti-Semitism and racism were lessening, and this play might not be applicable anymore. And obviously, with the things that are happening in our culture, the play still speaks directly to the American experience. And I wish I could say this play is a period piece, and they're talking about an America that doesn't exist anymore, where people don't see color and don't judge by race. So, well, as long as it is applicable, I'm happy that it's theater. It's been sitting on my shelf for 10 years, and so theater. I talk about theater as a transitional art form, as opposed to a terminal art form, not being dead, but playwriting is a transitional art form because I'm not done. Erwin and I can spend a year writing a play, but we're just then handing you something, and it's only fully realized when you as actors interact with an audience and we have an aesthetic experience together in the theater, or in this case, online. And I'm sure Dr. Chester talks about that in her theater classes, and that's what's exciting, to see it alive and creating this conversation. And I mean, that's what playwrights, we dream of. What are they going to say when they're in their car driving home from the theater? That's the goal, to get them talking, and ideally talking with someone in the theater afterwards who they might not normally talk to. And so it's exciting. So I thank you.
And God willing, someday this will be a period piece, and we'll be in it what it used to be like. Erwin, last thoughts?
Yeah, just quickly, I guess I'll invoke, MLK. He speaks about a beloved community, and that's the goal. But a beloved community isn't a kumbaya community. A beloved community is a community where love is the ground for an incredible pursuit of justice. And one of the things that may have happened in the culture is that we got this love over here that's sort of a sloppy love, and we got a justice over here that is a severe justice that actually isn't just. And I think that Nia and Jerry, and I hadn't thought about it until tonight, I think that in some respects, while Nia and Jerry are individuals and they don't correct systems, that's a very important point. Love and justice seem to be playing together in that. And while they have to leave their communities, just maybe it's possible, if we do this, that we can create beloved communities.
Yeah. And just the final thought from my perspective, you mentioned how Jews always go first to Auschwitz. It's like anything that happens immediately becomes Auschwitz. Being a child of Holocaust survivors, my father was in Auschwitz. And so I grew up with Auschwitz in my, in my soul. And yet, I look at the world and I see all the different BIPOC, cultures, and every culture has its own version of Auschwitz. Every culture has its own version of persecution and hatred, and and even the white people. When you think about it, they had to run away from England and have a revolution to get away from the king because they were being persecuted for religious purposes and etc. So I think it's important that we continue to find artistic expressions that open the doors, build the bridges. And I thank you all, Erwin, Kula, Richard, Krevlin, Leela, Elam, Dr. Chester, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen out there that are watching, that are still with us, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Support our work. Go to whyilovejewish.org. See what we're doing. We have a YouTube channel with hundreds of programs, and we try to stimulate the conversation and find a way to make the world a better place. Tikkun olam. I still believe in it. Let's make the world a better place. So thank you all for joining us. And
thank you so much.
Until the next time. Thank you.